welcome to our show tonight, Polygamy, What Love Is This? I'm your host, Doris Hanson, and we do this show to let our culture know that polygamy is something that, although they say it's required by God, it truly isn't. If you study the Bible, you can discover God's will for our lives, and it doesn't include polygamy. And we're here to communicate to our culture also that salvation doesn't come through or have anything to do with or following Joseph Smith. Our purpose is also to introduce this culture to Bible passages like Micah chapter 6 verse 8. In that passage it says, "He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God." We have three things mentioned here that God says He requires of us. He's mentioned them Himself. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say that God requires polygamy, and it doesn't say that God requires believing in Joseph Smith. If those were required, this would have been the perfect place for Him to tell us that. We are broadcasting live from Salt Lake City, Utah, and this is a telephone call-in program. Our telephone number is 801-973-TV20, 801-973-8820. We would love to have you call in about halfway through the show when we open up our telephone lines for your comments and your questions. If you do have questions that perhaps has already been asked, it is some of our top questions asked, you can go to our website, whatloveisthis.tv/answers, and our top questions are there along with the answers. And if you wanted to ask that question, then you've got your answer there already. You can also watch all of our previous shows on streaming video at whatloveisthis.tv. We do have a support group. It's entitled Life After Polygamy. We meet once a month, and it's open to everyone whose lives have been touched by polygamy in some way. We would love to have you come. It's been very helpful and therapeutic, and it's nice to reach out to others and help them as well as they struggle with getting themselves back on track after having left a polygamy group. So if you're interested in coming, you can call tonight and leave your contact information. We'll call you back, or you can email us, tv@aboutpolygamy.com, and we will give you the meeting information. We're meeting again in May this month on the 17th at 6:30 p.m. That's a Monday evening. And if you want to learn more about our ministry to polygamists, you can go to shieldandrefuge.org, shieldandrefuge.org, to learn more about our ministry and us and what we do to help the polygamy people. And you can also find our resources that we have available, where you could get a free DV or a free book about polygamy, biblical polygamy. You can find out how to get that on that website. And if you are in a polygamous situation and you would like some help, we do have a toll-free number you can use to call us, and we can discuss your situation. The toll-free number is 877-425-9993. Everything that we talk about will be held in confidentiality. We can help you get out of a polygamy group. We can help you stay out, and we will help you after you get out. Next week, our guest is going to be Ross Anderson. He's been on the show before as one of our guests, and he is a pastor of the Wasatch Church in Roy, Utah. He is an ex-Mormon as well. He's written a workbook, and it's entitled Jesus Without Joseph. We think that you'll find this to be very helpful, especially those of you who are in the LDS Church or the Mormon fundamentalist groups, or if you have left one of these groups, and especially if you have found a huge void in your life after you've left, this will be very helpful to you. So we do hope that you will watch and tune in next week. As you probably have heard, and maybe some of you haven't heard, today is the National Day of Prayer. And hopefully many Christians have spent extra time in prayer today, petitioning our God to pour out His grace and His mercy, and to grant this culture, our culture here in this state, freedom from its religious bondage, and freedom from the stranglehold of false prophets and a false salvation plan, and to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God, that they will receive forgiveness of sins and a place among the sanctified by faith in Jesus Christ, not by works. that they would be able to see the glory of the true gospel of God in the face of Jesus Christ and so be saved. That is certainly our prayer and our purpose. 2 weeks ago, we presented part 1 of the story of Zina Huntington Jacobs. She was an early Mormon pioneer and polygamist, and she married Henry Jacobs when she was about 7 months after Henry Jacobs and Zina were married. She also secretly married Joseph Smith as one of his polygamous wives, and Zina then became the active wife of 2 living husbands. She was 20 years old, and that is called polyandry. After Joseph Smith's death, she was taken as a plural wife by Brigham Young, and she was sealed to him for time and was sealed to Joseph Smith for eternity. You can go to our website, whatloveisthis.tv, and click on previous episodes, and then click on April 22nd and watch the first show, part 1, online. Tonight we're dramatizing part 2 of the Zina's story in her early polygamy life, and we want you to know this is a dramatization. We do hope that we don't have callers calling in wondering if our guest is 150 years old, because obviously she's not. We are taking our material from historical journals, personal journals, and we would also like you to remember that Zina's marriage to Joseph Smith and to Brigham Young is probably as good as documented or better documented than any of the other plural wives. It is solidly documented from many different sources that these events actually did take place. And again, our guest who is going to dramatize the part of Zina Huntington is Dorothy Catlin. She will be here to finish the story, which we started a couple of weeks ago, and she will be telling her story in as many as Zina's own words as is possible. So I would like to introduce again tonight, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming again.
Glad to be here.
Putting all your blood, sweat, and tears in getting this prepared and ready to go. It is really quite an effort, isn't it, to get this together?
Zina's story is fascinating. I have really learned a lot doing research, and I've enjoyed learning about her life. We've talked about that.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And again, for those who perhaps didn't see the first show, the outfit that Dorothy has on is made by her own hands specifically for the show, the bonnet and the dress, but your shawl and your collar are actually...
Yeah, actually the collar came out of a trunk full of antique things that was found in my family 30 years ago or so, and so it's actually the real deal. It's lace from about that time, and the shawl has been in our costume box for a number of years, but it works. It works.
Yeah, it does, and it looks very good, very authentic. Thank you. Okay, well, we've got a lot of material to cover, so let's get moving on this. After you had married Joseph Smith, he would often send your husband, Henry Jacobs, on missions frequently, and sometimes into close destinations and other times far away destinations. But during one of the times that your husband, Henry, was absent, you wrote in your journal that your husband, referring to Joseph Smith, was a master mason, and that you would often attend some of his ritual meetings with him.
Well, Joseph was also my husband, although I couldn't tell anybody about it. The revelation on celestial marriage hadn't even been written down at that point, and Joseph was only telling a very few people and very carefully selected ones. Everything was so secret. He said he'd been charged by an angel to reveal the law of celestial marriage only to those that were pure, full of integrity, and worthy to be trusted. So that meant there were just very, very few of us. It was very secret. We couldn't tell anybody what we were doing. And at the same time, he was denying it in public.
And, you know, that's what's amazing. We can't help but wonder how people could believe that God would make polygamy a requirement for salvation, and then require them to keep it secret, to zip their lip and shut up and not talk about it among themselves, and at the same time publicly deny and condemn the practice. It certainly isn't a characteristic of the holy and perfect God that we find in the Bible. Let's review how your life changed after Joseph Smith died. He was, of course, killed in 1844, and then Brigham Young steps up to the plate. He takes over the leadership, and he takes several and marries several of Joseph Smith's widows. You've got some pictures.
I think we do have. There's a photograph right there of Brigham in the middle, and those women surrounding him were the ones who were also married to Joseph Smith. Now, there are a couple of them that we don't have photographs for, but there are 7 in that picture. And some say there were more, but those are the ones that we know for certain.
Those are the ones we know for sure. So they were Joseph's widows, and he took them, and you are, of course, on the larger picture there, Zina Huntington is.
And there were other widows, but these were the ones that Brigham
Right.
took.
In fact, Heber C. Kimball took more of the widows than Brigham Young did, more of Joseph Smith's widows. So you married Brigham Young, and yet you remained married to Henry Jacobs, your legal husband, and you said much the same as you did when you were with Joseph Smith. But there were some subsequent temple sealings that took place. Do you want to tell us about those?
There were. After Henry and I received our temple endowments, about a month later, I was sealed to Joseph Smith for eternity and to Brigham Young for time there in the Nauvoo Temple. That was in February of 1846. And the temple actually hadn't even been dedicated yet at that time, but it was finished. So we were among the very first to be married there. And at the time, I was 7 months pregnant with our second child, Henry's and my second child. And Henry stood witness to the ceremony.
Isn't that amazing?
He was
that your own husband would stand witness while you're marrying someone else. And it wasn't just a spiritual marriage that you were having with Brigham Young. It was the real deal, like you say. It included the sex and the whole bit.
Later on, that proved to be true.
For sure, yes.
It was a very confusing time. You have to understand, in those days after Joseph's death, there was such turmoil and such confusion among the saints. We just really did not know what was going to happen. And we heard sermon after sermon on order in the kingdom, and how important it was to stay united, and that there must be union in families, which was code for plural marriage. All of those things had to be before any great exaltation could take place. And after hearing one particular sermon, I wrote in my journal, "Lord, do help me to treasure up these truths and profit thereby, that through the worthiness of thy sons I may be able to enter through the gate into this celestial city and dwell with the sanctified."
And so we see Zina's heart there. She has a zeal for what
I wanted to be obedient. I wanted to do what God required of me, but it was hard.
I'm sure it was very hard. And in this statement, you say that through the worthiness of his sons, showing that you believed that your eternity, your eternal life was dependent upon your husbands.
That's what we were taught.
That's exactly right. Rather than the worthiness of your husbands, rather than the worthiness of Jesus Christ. And so Zina was depending upon the arm of flesh for something that only God could do. So you're 8 months pregnant now. You prepare for the wagon train trek west. And it was a cold and a miserable trip when you started out, and as you continued on, and you gave birth to a baby boy while Henry, your husband, watched your older son.
That was an amazingly difficult passage. That morning, we had been en route for a while, but that morning, while I was eating my breakfast in the rain, George Smith had said to me, "Go on, Sister Zina, ride as long as you can, don't stop the camp if possible." Now, I was in labor, and I knew it. But finally, in my wagon, on the edge of the river, I gave birth to my second son. There, in the pouring rain, while the whole camp waited to cross, and right after the birth, they attached ropes to the wagon, lowered us down the bank, and hauled me and my newborn baby across the river. And the whole camp followed. And I remember the next night it was so cold that in the morning the cattle's feet had to be chopped out of the frozen mud.
Wow. That's amazing, isn't it?
It was.
We don't know what hardship is when we talk about the 21st century. But after your baby was born, the wagons were immediately going on without further delay. There wasn't any consideration for you.
Well, I wasn't the only one who gave birth on that trip. But
I'm sure. Well, let's say there was no consideration
the only one
for the
who
women.
gave birth on the river.
It must have been terribly miserable for you going on that trip after giving birth. But Henry stayed faithfully by your side
did.
until you reached Mount Pisgah, Iowa, which was a temporary stop on the Mormon Pioneer Trail. And at that point, the cruelty of Brigham Young became evident when he called Henry Jacobs out. And this is what he told Zina's husband. He said it was time for men who were walking in other men's shoes to step out of them. Brother Jacobs, Brigham Young said, the woman you claim for a wife does not belong to you. She is the spiritual wife of Brother Joseph, sealed up to him. She, with her children, are my property. You can go where you please and get another one, but be sure to get one of your own kindred spirit.
You know, when he said that, there were many in the camp who swore that he spoke with the voice and with the countenance of Joseph Smith. I did not witness that, but many said that was the way he delivered those words.
Well, that is highly doubtful.
As I said, I didn't witness that.
You're not going to confirm that one, are you? Well, this had to have devastated and humiliated poor Henry, your husband. He loved you. There's no doubt about his love and faithfulness towards you. And what's bothersome is that Brigham Young claimed you and your children as his property, as if women had no value except for to be considered property of the men. The very next day, he sends your husband, Henry, on a mission to England. And witnesses to Henry's departure commented that he was extremely ill, emotionally ill over the whole event.
Our son Zebulun remembered that his father had been in such low health that he had to be carried in a blanket to the wagon to start off on his mission.
I can imagine.
It was a blow.
You know, I wonder, with Brigham Young having so many other wives, we wonder why he insisted on having you as well. This was such a cruel trick to Henry and to the children. There's children involved in this as well. And I wonder if through the years, even after the day that you first married Joseph Smith, if Henry had dreaded this very event taking place sometime in the future, and finally his worst fears had come to reality. And that's why he was so ill. And people claim polygamy is from God? What a smear on God's character. The final episode in Henry's marriage to you is approaching. You're at winter quarters, and you and Brigham begin living together openly. And you said you were welcomed into his family. And of course, this is quite a change from the way Joseph Smith did it, because he was so secretive in the manner he did it. But you guys are living together openly now.
It had been very secret, but there was nothing secret about the way we lived at winter quarters. At the beginning, we lived in 5 or 6 in a tent together, and in a little while after that, they built some crude log shelters for us. But for some of those girls, it was very hard because it was the first time they'd ever left their parents. It was hard.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was very difficult. At first, you didn't inform your husband that you had these new living arrangements with Brigham Young. Tell us about that.
No, Henry didn't know at that time, and I've saved some of his letters that he wrote me after he left on the mission. So here, let me read you a couple. Just before he sailed for England, he wrote to me, "Zina, I have not forgotten you. My love is as ever the same and much more abundantly, and hope that it will continue to grow stronger and stronger to all eternity. I remain as ever your affectionate husband in truth."
He's loved you, still
he
loves
did.
you.
Yeah, and I loved him. And then later on from England, he wrote, and see, he didn't know about our circumstances at this point. He wrote, "Whether in life or in death, whether in time or eternity, Zina, my mind will never change. Worlds without end know never. The same affection is there and can never be moved."
Poor Henry. I feel bad for him. I want to cry for the poor guy. Even though you knew that you were going to be spending the rest of your earthly life as Brigham Young's wife, Henry didn't fully understand this yet. And so you wrote a letter to your sister-in-law who was living in New York, who would soon see Henry.
I did. That was my brother Oliver's wife, Mary Neal Huntington. And Oliver had gone with Henry on that trip to England. And so I told Mary in the letter that I was married to Brigham and I was no longer considering myself Henry's wife. Now, when Henry and Oliver arrived home to New York, Mary read them the letter. I'm not sure that I really intended for that to happen, but in any case, Mary read them the letter, and that was the first Henry had heard of the arrangement. The whole thing was so troubling. And my brother Oliver wrote to me right away after that, and here's what he wrote. I got the letter you wrote to Mary. All is well. Henry is here and heard the letter. He says all is right, he don't care. He stands alone as yet. I've had almost as much trouble about you as he has. If only you knew my troubles, you'd pity me. Now, I was very close to Oliver, so this was a troubling letter, and Oliver was really struggling with it. And even though he had said, Henry said everything is right and he didn't care, I learned later that he had been so stunned by the news that he became depressed and resigned.
It's finally hitting him that he's losing. He's really losing. There's probably some deep hope that he was clinging on to, and every time something happened, he lost a little more of this hope. And a little. There's no historical mention of a formal or a legal divorce that you and Henry had, but they just took and traded partners according to what they said God's will was at that particular time.
That's the way it was in those early days of plural marriage. Every earnest Mormon was required to enter into plural marriage. And we were taught that the only marriages that meant anything were the celestial ones, that civil marriages really didn't mean anything. It was the spiritual marriages that carried all the value. Brigham said, women are entitled to salvation if they live according to the word that's given to them. They are entitled to certain blessings that they cannot receive unless they're sealed to men who will be exalted. So, you see, if there was any question about Henry's being exalted, then the marriage to Brigham was the one to be invested in. Any woman who refused to enter a plural marriage would lose the right to a husband in the eternities. So you have to remember, Henry had already said whatever the prophet did was right, without making the wisdom of God's authorities bend to the reasoning of any man. And he had written me earlier. I have to read you some of this letter too. He had written me earlier, because this will help you understand how things played out between us. I do not murmur or complain at the handlings of God. I do not blame any person or persons. No. May the Lord our Father bless Brother Brigham and all pertains unto him forever. Tell him for me, I have no hard feelings against him, nor ever had. All is right according to the law of the celestial kingdom of our God, Joseph.
Henry is referring to Joseph Smith as their God. You know, that's pretty troubling right there. But Brigham Young did that as well as Heber C. Kimball. And actually, I want to read some quotes where this is true. In the Journal of Discourses, Volume 5, page 88, it says, "You can call us fools, but the day will be when you will prize Brother Joseph Smith as the prophet of the living God and look upon him as a God." Heber C. Kimball, on July 26th of 1857, says that whether you are a Mormon or not, the time will come when you will prize and look upon Joseph Smith as a God, as well as Brigham Young. And referring to Joseph Smith, Brigham Young said in the Journal of Discourses, Volume 8, page 321, he said, "In a certain capacity, Joseph was a God to us and is to the nations of the earth and will continue to be," end quote. And so we find that they referred to Joseph Smith as God too, but I'm here to say Joseph Smith isn't even known by the nations of the earth, so that certainly is a false saying that Brigham Young said there. It's very odd that the Bible is so dogmatic about there being only one God, and we find that Joseph Smith was trying to do the same exact thing that caused Lucifer's fall. A year later, on the way back to winter quarters, Henry takes Brigham Young's advice and takes himself a wife, Zina Babcock, and then he joins the Mormon migration west, which is part of the train that you're on, right?
They traveled in the same general company as we did, and our little son Zeb traveled part of the time with his father and his new wife, and part of the time with me. The baby, of course, stayed with me. But it was an interesting time.
Well, there's a lot of stories between now and Utah, but you finally reach destination Utah, and you begin Mormon life there. And you suffered through so many moves and frequent changes, unsettled home life and so on. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, there were no words to describe my feelings when I first looked down into this Salt Lake Valley. All I saw was one little log cabin outside the old fort and miles of sagebrush and swamp and reeds. It was overwhelming. Those early years were so hard. I was 27 with 2 young children. Food was scarce. The winters were bitter cold and snowy. Everybody had to work so hard just to survive. At first we lived in our wagon box, me and the 2 little boys, and then later on my brother Dimmick built us a 2-room house inside the fort, and I moved in there for a while with my sister Presendia, and I taught school there for a couple of seasons. I didn't stay there long. There never seemed to be enough adequate housing for all of us, and I moved a lot back into my wagon, and then I moved into another very primitive little house. If you've seen photographs of some of those very early houses, they were very primitive.
And sometimes a lot of people lived in
yes,
little house
and then
too.
after that I moved into the log row houses where many of Brigham's other wives also lived.
Okay, so you're gradually making some headway there. How did you get along with Brigham Young's other wives?
Well, we were generally friendly with each other. Many of them had also been married to Joseph, as you saw the picture before, and some of my dearest friends were among those women. Eliza Snow was one. I think we have a photograph, actually, of oh yes, there it is. It's wonderful. That's me on the far left. That's Zina, and on the far right is Eliza Snow, and next to her is Emily Partridge, and then Bathsheba Smith next to me. I love that photograph.
And they're all Brigham Young's wives,
yes,
right?
Yes. Yes. But, we all generally did get along pretty well, but Harriet Cook was hard to get along with. I lived with her for a while in the log row house, and one time she said to me, "You are only a proxy wife. Brigham doesn't love you, and nobody else does either."
Oh, my goodness.
But you see, we proxy wives were in a funny position. Lots of people thought that Brigham had only married us to fulfill his responsibilities to Joseph. And so those wives that Brigham chose for himself thought they had a higher social status than the rest of us. And sometimes that seemed to be true.
Well, we do know that polygamy is not practice equality. It certainly isn't the epitome of equality in life. Well, how often did you see Brigham Young? Did you ever feel that you were slighted or neglected by him? Did you ever feel that you were cherished and valued by him?
Oh, not cherished and valued in particular. I was not really a favorite wife. I was just one among many, although I did bear him a daughter, which we'll talk about in a little while. But he would come and pay social calls. I didn't see him real often. He would come and pay social calls, and once in a while I would get an invitation to dinner at his house, but there were always lots of other wives there. I remember one time there was a family meeting where he came to supper at our house, but there were 17 wives there, so it really wasn't time with my husband. Then there was another time we went to a party. I went to a party with a relative and came in and found my husband there with some other wives.
But he had invited you to go with him.
No, he had not invited me, but I had been invited to the party.
Yeah, that must have stung pretty much to go in there and see your husband there. And
that was just the way life was.
Just the way it was, yeah. Okay. A polygamist husband really did not provide for or help in a wife's daily needs. You needed help. And he didn't give it to you. How did you get it?
I leaned on my brothers. Dimmick and Oliver were both here at the time, and I had other relatives among the saints. So I leaned on my relatives. You know, we all did, for money, for help with the chores. That was just the way we lived.
Wow. And it said that Brigham Young didn't support his wives and children. He even didn't follow through on making sure you had wood for winter warmth, and it was cold in those old log cabins.
It was. We pretty much had to get along as best we could. I remember how hard I toiled that first winter, 1849. I wrote in my journal that I had paid $33 for wood, all of which I had earned myself. So,
I'd like to know what the equivalent of that is today. That's
I have no idea.
a lot of money for them, I would think.
It was a lot then.
Imagine so. And yet the Bible warns in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, where it says, "But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." It's odd how they use the Bible both then and now to promote their polygamy doctrine, but they won't use the Bible for guidelines on living the rest of their life. And the problem with polygamy then and now is they didn't support their families. It's interesting too that they will use Abraham and Jacob and David as biblical polygamous men, but those men supported their wives and families. They never sent their wife out to earn money. They never let their wives go without the support of a husband. So if you're going to use them as examples, then follow them 100%. Right now, we want to open the telephone lines. We still have more of the story to go, but if you want to start calling in with any questions or comments that you may have on the story, and you don't mind holding on for just a few more minutes, you can begin calling in with your questions or comments. Our phone number is 801-973-8820, and we would love to hear from you. So let's get back. How often was Brigham Young there with you in your times of difficulty and loneliness?
Not very often. Not very often. That winter of 1850 was particularly hard. I was pregnant with my daughter by Brigham Young, and my health was just very poor through that pregnancy. But you can imagine how that would have been in the extreme cold and the poverty that we lived in. And my little son Sheraton was taken with the measles that winter, and he nearly died. And I wrote in my journal that winter, "No one will know the hours of painful loneliness that I saw by day and by night."
I can't imagine. Well, actually, I was raised in a polygamist home. Not as rough as this by any means. I don't even want to put it in the same category, but I saw a lot of tears. I saw a lot of bitterness as a result. Although you were not given to loud complaints, you did write from time to time in your journal about your tears and your pain that Brigham Young's agreeable attention was scanty at best.
I will tell you about one time. It was before one of my moves, and it was not a particularly happy encounter with Brigham. It was during that period of time when I was moving very frequently, and I was sitting alone in my wagon. My heart was just sore and tender, and Brigham came by to tell me that a room was ready for me to move into. And after he left, I'll just read you what I wrote. "Oh, did I not seek a lone retreat beside a murmuring rill? The water rolled over a fall of about 3 feet, where the sound of my voice would not be heard there. I wept, yes, wept, bitterness of soul. Oh, Lord, have mercy upon me. About 4 p.m., I moved into the room."
You were lonely and alone and needed a man's shoulder and arms to hold you and to take care of you, and you didn't have what you needed, what God provides for women. And people say that polygamy is from God. You said that Brigham Young was kind to us all, quote unquote, but obviously you discovered that polygamy is not kind or equally just to all.
Well, I learned that to be a successful polygamous wife, as the marriage develops and more wives are added, I had to learn to regard my husband with indifference, but with reverence. Love we regard as a false sentiment, a feeling which should have no place in polygamy.
Love has no place. You know, I've heard those quotes from other wives, but it seems that Joseph Smith took a different view from that. Of course, he was a male, and he didn't know any of the loneliness of polygamy that females know, but I'd like to quote something that Joseph Smith told Heber C. Kimball when he was looking for a plural wife. And this is the advice that Joseph Smith gave Mr. Kimball. He said, "You go and get you a young wife, one you can take to your bosom and love and raise children by. A man should choose his own wife, and one he can love and get children by in love." Interesting, Heber C. Kimball had 45 wives, and a man is supposed to pick his own wife. Funny, a woman can't pick her own husband. And also, Lorenzo Snow said this. You need to strap in on this one. He said, "One reason why illegitimate children are often so bright and intelligent is because they are begotten in love. And unless the children are begotten in love, they are not so liable to be so intelligent." Really?
We were taught that through polygamy, a race of men and women would grow up possessing sound mind and body and would live to the age of a tree.
Okay. But where's the love? You didn't have love, and these guys say they need to have love. That's what I mean. There's no equality. There's no justice.
It was about having children, not about love.
Yeah, I agree with you. But so Lorenzo Snow says, go have illegitimate children because they're begotten in love. What nonsense these men spout. Well, in April of 1850, you gave birth to a daughter by Brigham Young, and then 6 years later, you were invited to move into the Beehive House.
I was. We have a photograph of my beautiful Zina Presendia. Could we put that up? I love this photograph. As soon as they find it. There it is.
There we go.
There it is. She was a beautiful girl, and she looked so much like her father. Brigham Young's daughter, Zina Presendia. I named her after my own mother. And then when she was about 6, we were invited to move into the Lion House. And Cheriton lived with me there. He was a year or two older than Zina. But Zeb had moved in with another family because he was old enough to begin learning a trade. So he moved in with a family to learn the hat-making trade. And we moved into the newly built Lion House. We do have a photograph of that also. This picture was taken about 1858, and it was built about 1855. I moved in there a year after, and so you can see the Lion House is there on the left, and that's the Beehive House on the far right, and that little building in between served as offices at that time. I had a lovely room on the 3rd floor. It was the 5th one on the west side, and you can't see those windows in this photograph, but you can see how kind of undeveloped the land around there was.
Yes, absolutely.
A couple of years after that, Brigham asked me to take in the 4 children of another wife who had died, and so my little room became very crowded there in the Lion House.
It'd be interesting to know just how big your little room was, or how small your big room was. Well, we've got some calls waiting. I think we need to take some calls. Before we take the calls, we do have a spot that we would like to run, a message that we would like to run, and then we will take the phone calls. Are you thinking of leaving your polygamous situation? Are you afraid to leave because you might lose the love of your friends and your family and perhaps even the love of God? Are you afraid you'll become destitute if you do leave? When I ran away from my fundamentalist upbringing and the polygamy environment I was raised in, I had no safe place to go, no place that I knew that I would be safe after I left. And I was so naive, I didn't know that I was exchanging one bad situation for another one. In those days, there were no organizations established to help people who needed to safely exit a polygamist environment. That's why a Shield and Refuge ministry exists today. We're here to help those who want to leave a polygamous situation safely and without fear. We do provide you with a safe refuge, and you will be shielded from those who would harm you. So if you're thinking of leaving your polygamous situation, give us a call. We're here waiting to hear from you. Our telephone number toll-free is 1-877-425-9993. If you have access to the internet, you can locate us at www.shieldandrefuge.org. And you can contact us immediately, day or night. We would love to help you. God has made a promise in Psalm 91:4. that he shall cover you with his feathers, and you can take refuge under his wings. And it's his truth that will be your shield. Okay, now let's take some phone calls, and we've still got some stuff we want to cover before we close tonight, but we'll take these phone calls and see how far we can get on it. So we have line 1, Tina in West Jordan. Hello, Tina.
Yes.
Yes, you're on the air. What is your question or comment?
Hi, Doris.
Hi.
Well, I'm a little confused. The more than one man or more than one husband thing perplexes me, because they say you need to marry a man that has more than one wife to go to the celestial kingdom. And so, since Zina did that, even though he passed away, why would it be okay to marry Brigham Young? And then in the afterlife, who gets who?
I struggled with that, I can tell you. I thought after Joseph died that probably that phase of my life was over, and that Henry and I would go on living as husband and wife. It was a shock when Brigham came to us and insisted that I become his wife. But at that point in my life, I believed, along with Henry, that what the prophet said and what the prophet did was the voice of God. And so I really had no choice.
Yeah, but didn't he say, you know, you need to marry me?
Well, the worthiness was part of it there. If a woman could marry a man that was higher in worthiness than the husband she had, then she was obligated to marry that man. And Henry Jacobs didn't have the same worthiness that Joseph Smith or Brigham Young had.
Right, but Joseph is the highest one, and she married him first.
Right,
Well,
but
I would think that her prophecy had been fulfilled.
Well, you would think, but...
You know, in reading Zina's history, and this is me, Dorothy, speaking, not Zina, that's one of the very puzzling things, is why a marriage to Brigham would have been required when presumably you couldn't get any higher than Joseph Smith. That really is not adequately explained, but the documentation is very clear. And the pressure on her was significant to continue in this polyandrous situation until Brigham just dismissed her husband.
So is that what they call it, is polyandry? When
Well, that's what we call
more
it.
than
They
one
didn't
man?
call it that. That's what we call it.
Sealed?
When a woman has more than one husband, it's called polyandry.
Okay. Yeah, because it just seemed like there was two kinds of polygamy going on.
there was.
Both for the women and the men.
At the beginning in Nauvoo, there certainly was. That's, you know, a lot of the women that Joseph married were also legally married to other men, and that's documented, and there is no rational explanation for that. That practice did not continue, I don't think, past that first generation. Once the church came to Utah, it was pretty much polygamy, and once those original polyandrous wives had died, I don't know of any beyond that.
Not really, but I believe that that would also be where Warren Jeffs and some of these others would reassign wives to other men. They had that basis with what Joseph Smith practiced.
Yeah, in
So
that first generation of polygamists.
I could see reassigning wives to another man, but wouldn't the reassignment take away the first sealing?
Yes, they didn't live simultaneously with each other.
Right.
Okay.
It's very confusing.
It is puzzling.
It is. It certainly isn't what God would have us do. We certainly know that. So.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tina, for your call, and we hope you enjoy the program.
I do. I watch you every week.
Thank you.
Appreciate what you do.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Okay. We have Marlene in Richfield. Hello, Marlene.
Yes.
Yes, you're on the air. What is your question?
Hi there.
Hello.
I have a question about this. Well, a few minutes ago you had a service announcement.
Yes. Hello? Hello, Marlene? Did we lose you?
Yes. Did you say that you were a polygamist?
I was.
You were in a
I was born and raised in a polygamy group. Yes. Hello?
We're running a little behind from what I'm seeing. I have this question for Zina.
Oh, okay. Is your television turned down, Marlene?
She's listening.
Yes.
Yeah, well, you need to make sure it's turned down because there is a time delay.
Okay. This question for Zina.
I'm listening.
I can't hear any answers. During the early church, were you and your husband not sealed to Joseph Smith?
Oh no, my husband was not sealed to Joseph Smith. No, I was sealed to Joseph. Husbands don't seal to each other. It's only wives.
During the early part of the church, the families thought, the husband and wife thought they needed to be sealed to the prophet. Because they had no genealogical information at that time.
The way it was explained to me was that as the wives were sealed to the prophet, then that would serve to connect all of those families in the eternities. I know it defies reason, but that's the way I understood it, that I needed to be sealed to the prophet in order to ensure that my family and my posterity would be connected to him in eternity.
Including your earthly husband, Henry?
No.
That I do not know. I don't think Henry was part of that picture.
Huh. Also, did you ever have children with Joseph Smith?
Not with Joseph. I had a daughter with Brigham Young. I had no children by Joseph. 2 sons with Henry.
Well, it's been really interesting to hear your comments about, the early church, and it was interesting for me to find out that Dorothy, you were part of a polygamous family yourself. So that brings a lot of things together for me in my mind.
Well, that's Doris, who was part of a polygamous family.
I'm sorry, Doris. I'm sorry, Doris.
I was not.
Okay, Marlene, thank you for your call in. Well,
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for calling. Good night.
Bye.
Okay, we have Patty in Taylorsville. Hello, Patty.
Yes, hi there.
Hi, you're on
Hello.
the air.
Well, thank you, Doris. I've listened to you for many months. I had a question about what was the difference. Zina mentioned that she was married to one of the husbands for time, and then another one of the husbands for eternity. What is the difference?
Well, eternity is eternity. When I was sealed to Joseph Smith, that was going to extend on into eternity. But when I married Brigham Young, the understanding was that that was only for time. When he or I died, then that marriage would be dissolved. And that actually is still true in understanding today.
That, yes.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much. I enjoyed watching the show.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you.
Okay, good night. Okay, Zina, very quickly, let's get into the ultimatum of Brigham Young.
We need to talk about the complaining, because there was a great deal of complaining among the wives once we all came west. Some of the women said they had not seen a week's happiness since their husbands had taken other women into the household. And Brigham delivered a fiery sermon about it that just made us tremble. I'll just read you a couple of things that he said. He said, "My wives have got to do one of 2 things, either round up their shoulders to endure the afflictions of this world and live their religion, or they may leave. I will not have them about me." He said he would rather go into heaven alone than have this scratching and fighting around him. And he wanted to go somewhere to get rid of the whiners. This sermon made such great waves. It was actually recorded in the Journal of Discourses, and we have a picture of Brigham with that reference on it, if we can put that up. So you see, you can read that for yourself. There is a lot to that sermon. But he said you have to bow down to the celestial law if you choose to stay. And he threatened to release all the women from their marriages and told them they could just go.
They had 2 weeks, didn't they?
2 weeks
make up
to
their
decide,
mind.
to stay and buckle down to the system that they were given, or leave.
Now, I would surmise at this point that if the women had been treated right, that there never would have been this huge wave of dissatisfaction where he would have had to give the ultimatum, which gives a blanket lie to the myth that is perpetrated so often in this culture that early Mormon polygamy was contentment and holy and noble, and people loved living it, and the rest of the myth that goes with it.
Well, but, you know, if those women had chosen to leave, where could they go?
Exactly.
We had all come here into this wilderness and were totally dependent. We had children. Some of those first wives had given 20 or 30 years to raising their husbands' children.
Right. And I think Brigham Young knew that when he gave them the ultimatum, because they would have been turned out without clothes, without food, with or without their children. It would depend. And without any money. Brigham Young knew there had no options. He knew that what the answer would have to be.
But after that sermon, very, very few left. Women stopped complaining, at least loudly.
That's what happened. Yeah, that's what happened. That's what happened. They were destitute, and they knew they will. Well, meanwhile, you are still married to Henry, your legal husband. He moves to California. Utah Mormons look down on California Mormons, so Henry was disfellowshipped, excommunicated. And some people think that the reason that he was excommunicated was because he was trying to win you back. They used other reasons, but he still was in love with you.
You know, Henry wrote to me for years, and some of those letters were very sad. I'll just read you a couple of statements. He wrote to me from California, "I am unhappy. There is now no peace for poor me. My pleasure is you. My comfort has vanished." And then later on he wrote, "I think of you very often, Zina. Are you happy? Do you enjoy your life as pleasant as you did with me when I was at home with you and the children? Oh, Zina, will I ever get you again? Answer the question, please." And then he wrote to me about his excommunication. He said, "I've heard that I was cut off from the church. For what was I cut off? Never did I do anything worthy of being cut off. Always have I defended this cause."
And he was faithful.
He was unhappy, but he was faithful.
He was faithful to the church. He always did what he was told to do without complaint and without question. And he was tread upon. His rights were really tread upon. We do have line 2, Doug in Murray calling. Hello, Doug.
Hello.
Yes, you're on the air. What's your question?
The law of eternal progression, which Mormons believe that when they obtain the celestial kingdom, that they will have an opportunity to have thousands and thousands and millions of children and continue on as gods and goddesses.
Right.
Is that part of what the Mormons believe as polygamy? Is it the eternal polygamy that we're looking at here?
Oh, that's definitely part of it. You betcha.
So it goes way beyond this earth.
Into eternity, forever and ever.
Eternity.
They call it eternal increase.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is totally non-biblical.
You have a world of your own, just like the earth.
Yeah. And be your own God. And
God and a goddess.
Right. That's right. And if a man has 14 wives, then he gets 14 worlds to populate,
worlds.
and so on, yeah. So the more powerful...
Is there any other religion in the world that looks at any of these areas in any way the same way as the Mormons?
No, there's some mythology from, I think, Greek and a little bit of Hinduism in it, but no, basically not quite the way the Mormons have it compiled together.
So that really, and then along with the council in heaven and Jesus and Lucifer being our brothers, and then they come down and Lucifer is the evil. It looks like to me that they tore that apart.
Well, they did, and Doug, we are getting close to the end of the show, and we'd like to wipe this up, wrap this up.
That was my point, is that there are so many doctrines.
We need to wipe it up, too.
Many doctrines of the Mormon Church that are totally, that are totally different than any other church.
That's right, Doug, and I appreciate your call. We're going to have to go on forward here.
You have a wonderful evening.
Okay,
Thank
thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye now.
Well, we want to quickly wrap this up and get to the end of the story. We do have one more caller, but let's move to the Brigham Young's death. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we close up with
Well, I just wanted to say that I was an advocate for polygamy to my dying day. And that's because I lived most of my adult life according to this law of celestial marriage that was revealed to me by Joseph. It was the word of God to me. And so I continued to advocate for polygamy all of my life.
As did many of Brigham Young's,
many women.
The faithful polygamist women. Not that they enjoyed the polygamous life, but they truly believed what Joseph Smith told them.
And one of the reasons we did that was because the reorganized church that stayed behind began sending missionaries to Utah saying they wanted to correct our doctrine because Joseph had never lived or taught polygamy or plural marriage. And we were fed up.
Yeah.
So that was enough of that. And so actually we filed legal affidavits stating that there had been plural marriages
with Joseph Smith. So you brought things out of the darkness, out of the secret,
there were
and made it public.
Ultimately 75 of those documents published that state legally that Joseph
and they're still
was plurally
claiming
married.
that group still claims that Joseph Smith didn't live polygamy.
That's correct.
They still claim that. Okay, we only have 2 minutes left on the show. Let's do quickly. Brigham Young died in 1877 before Henry Jacobs did. And a friend of mine, we went up to the Salt Lake City Cemetery where Zina Huntington was buried. And on her gravestone, we finally found her gravestone and took a picture of it, if we could see her gravestone there. And engraved on it is that she was the wife of Brigham Young. It doesn't say she was the wife of Joseph Smith. It doesn't say she was the wife of Henry Jacobs. But she is buried in Henry Jacobs' plot. And we wonder why the secrecy. Even in death, they didn't come out with the total truth. Why wasn't Joseph Smith mentioned on her gravestone? And why wasn't her legal husband mentioned there either? So even in death, we find that their secrecy prevails, their facts are concealed, and we wonder why. We wonder what a sad and misguided life and so much pain is caused by polygamy, and all for a lie. We are sorry, we still have another call we won't be able to take, and we are sorry for the length of that, but we do want to thank you all for watching the show. I thank you so much, Dorothy. What would be your thoughts while you were working through this for polygamy today, polygamists today?
I was struck by the sadness of Zina's life and the complications of her life, how difficult her life was. It was so sad that she was dependent on those multiple marriages in order to be assured of her salvation.
For salvation. And that's what's sad, is that they live a life in this world and then they die and find out that they had lived a life that wasn't necessary. Jesus Christ is the Savior, folks. No man is any woman's Savior. Jesus is every man's Savior.